Hey, it's Coach Anderson again here from Mississippi Public Broadcasting Online, U.S. History from 1877 to present. Today we're going to be looking at Unit 6, World War I. We're going to be talking about the United States of America's initial neutrality involved in the war, and then we're going to talk about our eventual, of course, moving into a more active role in the war. Now, we're going to find that this period in American history is going to last from 1914 to 1920. Where if you have a journal, please go ahead and take out that journal, write down any questions that you might have or any vocabulary terms, of course, that you may need some explanation of what they are. We'll try to address those as we come up to them. Today, we're going to look at the start of World War I with Unit 6, of course, Lesson 1. And as in every lesson that we give you, for every unit, we'll have a unit-focused question. Today's unit-focused question says, what factors caused World War I and caused the United States involvement? Now remember, we won't answer that question, of course, throughout this throughout this lesson, but what we will do, of course, is expect you to start formulating your answer so that when we get to the end and the summative assessment, you can give us an explanation of what that particular question entails. Today we're going to start with our Do Now activity. Do Now activity says journal topic. It says, what does the term powder keg mean to you? We're going to give you a few moments, look over that term, and identify what you think might be a good term to identify, good definition to identify what that term means. Okay, you should have had enough time that you were able to go through and look at what the term powder keg means. Well, you look at that term powder, of course, to me, it always evokes some type of explosive. When you look at a powder keg, I think about Saturday morning cartoons, of course, when you have the big TNT bombs, of course, and when they explode and causes a mass destruction. So when we think about powder keg, what you might have come up with was an idea of some kind of explosion or bomb. What we're going to do is move on, and in the vocabulary we have today is academic vocabulary and content vocabulary. In looking at those vocabulary terms, if at any point that you have a question about one of them, we'll try to address them as much as we can. But if not, you can look them up yourself, of course, and probably get a definition, probably even better than one I could give you. Today, in terms of the two lesson-focused questions, unlike the unit-focused questions, we don't address the unit-focused question per lesson, but we will look at two lesson-focused questions that kind of guide us in terms of what our the main idea for the lesson is. The first two lesson-focused questions we have is what caused the regional conflict among two small nations to grow into a world war, and what prompted the United States to get involved in World War I. The causes of World War I. Well, I always say it's 3 isms and 2 alliances. And the isms are militarism, imperialism, and nationalism. Well, when you look at militarism, it's an arms buildup. And you're going to find that there's going to be competition between nations, of course, to see who can build up the biggest, baddest armies or militaries, of course, at that time. Then imperialism was the idea that you should go out and, of course, and spread your influence by taking over smaller, weaker countries. There was a competition between nations to do that. And then nationalism was about national ego, was the belief that you should emphasize your nation's superiority. And then the last thing was the system of secret alliances or secret mutual defense agreements that led to when one particular nation got involved in the fight, they had, of course, partners or allies, of course, that came to their defense. Trouble in the Balkans. Well, the war begins with a trip. It begins with the trip of Archduke Francis Ferdinand, who was the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. In 1914, he was assassinated by Gavrilo Princip from Serbia, and this caused the conflict, of course, to start. Now, at the initial starting of the conflict, it's just between Austria-Hungary, of course, and Serbia, two small, insignificant nations that most of you probably wouldn't even heard of or knew about. Most people didn't know about it at that time. We're going to find that because Austria-Hungary had secret alliances and because Serbia had secret alliances, they both, when they declare war on each other, their allies or partners get involved in the war also. And that's what kind of makes this particular conflict, of course, grow. This is the heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire's throne. His name was Archduke Franz Ferdinand. He and his wife Sophie were traveling, in Serbia, of course, when he was killed by Princip. The alliances were World War I. As we said earlier, the war would have been pretty insignificant had it just been Serbia versus Austria-Hungary. But because they both were aligned with some of the major powers of Europe, it's going to pull everyone else into this particular alliance. On one side, you have the Triple Alliance, and the Triple Alliance was Serbia, Russia, France, Great Britain, and on the Triple Entente, on the other side, Austria-Hungary, Germany, Bulgaria, Italy, and Ottoman Empire. So when we look at it, not only do those people, of course, get involved in the conflict, but any allies that they would have or any colonies that they control throughout the rest of the world, of course, will be pulled into the conflict on their side as well. So when you look at United States neutrality, now at the beginning of the war, you notice that when we look back at this particular slide, we don't see the United States of America mentioned at any point. And the reason being because in the initial 2 to 3 years of the war, the United States of America is not involved. We don't get involved in the war until much, much later. Now, we did have our picks and chooses, of course. Now, at the beginning of the World War I, the United States adopted a policy of neutrality, which lasted for more than 2 years. President Woodrow Wilson campaigned on the slogan, "He kept us out of war." And because of that, he was elected president again in 1916. American banks did cash in on the conflict, of course, by making or loaning money to both sides. Now, we did have more of a historical connection with the British, and as a result of that, we kind of sent more support in the direction, of course, of the British. Now, we did have a large German population that lived throughout the Midwestern part of the United States of America, and it kind of, made some feelings between different sections of the United States of America a little bit iffy because of the war. Unrestricted submarine warfare. One of the biggest issues in World War I had to deal with unrestricted submarine warfare, and what that was, because Germany didn't have as big of a navy as the British, they used the submarines, of course, to attack the British Navy. And they also, of course, in the use of these submarines, of course, in some cases would attack passenger liners that would have innocent people on board because they believed that the British, of course, were sending in supplies, getting supplies from other places like the United States of America, to fight the war. So they used submarines to attack the British Navy, but also, in some cases, any ships that were in the war zone, of course, would be targets from the submarines. The United States does enter the war. There were two reasons why the United States of America gets involved in the war. First is because of the use of unrestricted submarine warfare. A British ship called the Lusitania was sunk, and Americans on board, of course, were killed. So Americans, of course, back at home in the United States of America didn't like that. And the Germans, of course, basically apologized, said that they won't do it anymore, but then they resumed the use of unrestricted submarine warfare. And then the second thing that happens is something called the Zimmermann telegram. In the Zimmermann telegram, the German ambassador, Arthur Zimmermann, sent a telegram to Mexico asking them to enter the war on the side of the Triple Entente. And they, of course, and then he asked them, of course, to attack the United States of America. And when we intercepted that telegram and we saw that, when we looked upon that, of course, as being an act of war. And on April 2nd, 1917, the United States of America gets involved in World War I. Here's the picture of Arthur Zimmermann. And one of the things he promises Germany is a return of the Mexican cession. All those states are territories that the United States of America had received from the Mexican War, Arizona, Texas, California, a return of those places once the war was over with if the United States of America was defeated. All right, that gets us to our two lesson focus questions. The first one was what caused the regional conflict among two small nations to grow into a world war? And number two, what prompted the United States to get involved in World War I? Well, the first one, secret alliances and existing tensions caused by colonial interests caused the regional conflict to expand. Once again, if as long as the war was just between Serbia and Austria-Hungary, it would have just been a minor hiccup, of course, in the U.S., in the history of the world. But because of those alliances and the pulling in of different people, it becomes, of course, a much bigger conflict. And then the second question, what prompted the United States of America to get involved in the war? As we said, there were two things: unrestricted submarine warfare, British propaganda that they used, of course, talking about how bad the Germans, of course, were. And then, of course, the Austrian-Hungarians, and then the interception of the Zimmermann telegram. So those were the things, of course, that kind of brings America, of course, into the conflict. That ends lesson one, and we hope we gave you some ideas about why it is that the United States of America got involved in World War I, why it is that, of course, that the war expands, and what were some of the causes of the war. Now, remember what I always tell you, though. This is just my opinion. This is, or the things, of course, that I've researched and I've found. But remember, U.S. history, of course, is your history, which means that you can do your own research and you can make your own decisions. This is Coach Anderson from Mississippi Public Broadcasting Online, U.S. History. We'll see you next time. And remember, go ahead and do your own research. Thank you.